Good morning, Jeremy.
Now, who are we going to talk about this morning?
We're going to talk about William Normer, who was a painter, plumber and publican.
Oh, it's an interesting combination,
Isn't it? But I think I've said before that all of the people who were in Pioneers Pioneers had to be multi-skilled, multifaceted, and they, of course, quite often went broke in one business, moved on to another venture, and perhaps prospered or not so.
It's almost that full circle thing, isn't it? Where today, we tell kids today, you've got to have more than one career in life. It's like, well, back then you also had to have more than one career in life.
I think it's interesting when you find that in the midst of some of the descriptions of these early pioneers that you might have painter and plumber, but you'll also have chemist and teacher, and
right.
That starts to worry me a little. I just wonder quite how where you get your skills as a chemist if you've been doing other tasks.
Well, I suppose at that time it would have been a less complex, a less complex science in some ways maybe, but maybe not, I don't know.
Yes, and I suppose there would have been more home remedies used, but then of course if you did that you wouldn't use a chemist, would you? Are we being sidetracked?
Oh, I don't know. Anyway, back to William.
Yes. Okay, well, William Norman arrived in Victoria in 1853 on the Great Britain, and interestingly his wife Eliza and some of her family were on that same boat as well. So this is obviously something that happened fairly regularly, that people met on the boat and they subsequently married.
So they weren't married at the time?
No, they were not married at the time. But so they married in Australia, and they had several children born in Australia, starting at Emerald Hill, which is where they first went to. Of course, Emerald Hill is now called South Melbourne.
Right.
It's not an area that people would perhaps recognise readily now. But they had 10 children, and of those, 4 died the year they were born. One died as a 3-year-old, and the rest of them lived to sort of varying ages. One as far as 90. But it's interesting because things were so different then, and the likelihood of a child reaching their first birthday was significantly diminished in relation to the way it is now with children.
Yeah, indeed.
But William and Eliza first lived in Emerald Hill, as I said, and they came to Warrnambool in 1857, and he was, to add another P to it, he was initially a plumber, paperhanger and painter.
Paperhanger.
He had a shop in Timor Street opposite the Rising Sun Hotel, which is about where the Roller Bowl is in Warrnambool now.
Right, okay.
Across the road from there was where William had his business.
Right, where the Archie Graham Centre is.
A
more or less,
little
maybe?
bit further, closer towards Liebig Street, I would suggest.
Okay.
But he would have had an apprenticeship in before he came out, because the UK census of 1851 described him as a plumber, so he had some formal education, you would imagine, in that. So he was quite involved in the township here, and he was involved with the cricket club, and he was coach painting. He was involved with the Allansford and Wangoon Presbyterian Church. He was on the committee of the Benevolent Society, volunteered with the fire brigade, and that in 1863 he sold off all his stock in trade, and then he became the publican of the Steam Packet Inn, and do you know where the Steam Packet Inn was?
I presume it's not the one that's at Flagstaff Hill these days.
No, it's not. No, actually, this particular site was initially purchased by Manifold and Bostock in 1854, and it was a private bond store. So I'm giving you clues as to where this might be. And the old horse-drawn tramway went past the bond store and out onto the jetty.
Okay.
So the old Lady Bay.
Right, okay, right.
So it went from being a bond store, then it became the Western Steam Packet, then it became the Steam Packet when Norman had it in 1863. Later it changed to Bayview Hotel, then the Lady Bay.
Right, okay.
And then it's, really been changed and enlarged. And it also, the Lady Bay encompassed the Prince of Wales Hotel, which was also on a similar site there. So he was a man of significant capacity to do various things. But eventually, obviously, as happened with many of them, his fortunes took a downward spiral, and he moved back to Emerald Hill, and he had a business there with not publican but the paper hanging and painting and so forth, and he died in 1873. I beg your pardon. That was when he became insolvent.
Right.
But he also had a shop in Auburn Road, but he died when his horse carriage was stuck by a train at the corner of Spencer and Flinders Street.
Wow.
Which is a bit interesting. It's just, you can't imagine what it would be like in those days with the kind of traffic that was currently there. Interestingly, the cab driver was up on a charge of manslaughter in connection with the accident that killed William Norman. He was a passenger in the cab, and he was obviously heading down, I would think, down Clarendon Street to Emerald Hill. And when the a railway line was running across the road, and the train was coming along, and the cab driver, McCrow, drove across in front of it. His cab was smashed and the persons in it were thrown out, and Mr. Norman was seriously hurt and died 3 days later from the injuries. And evidence was that he was a good cab driver, and there was some suggestion that at the moment of crossing the line, the gatekeeper came out and flashed his lamp and in front of the horse's eyes, and that caused the horse to swerve and misbehave, and that was the result of the accident.
Right.
Now, he was acquitted and then had to go to retrial, and I haven't been able to quite work out what happened as a result of that. But certainly William Norman came to an unfortunate end, but he was someone who played a role in the early days of Warrnambool.
Well, Glenys, thank you again. We'll talk with you soon.
Thank you, Jeremy.